In the 1930s, Ida Mae Gladney and her sharecropper husband, George, were no longer happy picking cotton in Mississippi. Stories of change, possibility, and a different future were in the air. Other black families were starting to move to far-off places like Milwaukee and Chicago, places that sounded like the promised land, a land of opportunity. But the Gladneys weren't quite sure they were ready to leave everything behind until a 13-year-old boy they knew was accused of looking at a white woman and hanged. That was it. They packed up what they could carry and they headed north. When Ida Mae and George got to Chicago, like so many immigrants before and since, there was no welcome, no promised land. George ended up hauling ice, and Ida Mae did odd domestic jobs. Life eventually got better, but even in the worst of times, Ida's spirit and determination touched those she encountered. Like Ida, from the 1920s to the 1970s, more than 6 million African Americans moved away from oppressive conditions of the South in what is now called the Great Migration. And while people like Ida didn't find that promised land, they did ultimately determine that this imperfect journey was a necessary journey to transform lives for the better. Ida lived long enough to cast a vote for Barack Obama. And she was able to tell her story, a story of looking toward the future, of doing the hard but necessary work of change. Her experience is reflected in the words of Richard Wright. I was leaving the South to fling myself into the unknown. I was taking a part of the South to transplant in alien soil to see if it could grow differently, if it could drink of new and cool rains, bend in strange winds, respond to the warmth of other suns, and perhaps to bloom.
Perhaps to bloom. In the story of David and Goliath, which we mentioned briefly, the younger man, David, collects 5 smooth stones to aid him in his battle with the giant Goliath. And the Jewish Midrash tradition has many interpretations on why he was holding those stones. One of the ones that I like the best is that he understood that while God might be on his side, God was not expecting him to just stand there and do nothing. So if he was to bloom, if his people were to survive, he needed to do something with those rocks. In the middle of the last century, in another time of changes and migrations, Unitarian theologian James Luther Adams recast this metaphor of the 5 stones. The first, as our meditation said, reminds us that in our tradition, our questioning tradition, we will always be learning new ways to make our highest aspirations real in our world. James Luther Adams was a thought leader in our movement at the time when we were moving from being a predominantly liberal Christian association to include humanism, science, and world religions. And right now, in the week that we're in the week in which the College Board, which runs the SATs, has determined that math is far more important than Shakespeare, when we learn, as Susan Junefish said, that the waters in Flint, Michigan have been poisoned, in another week through which Syrian refugees wander uncertain of their welcome, we are reminded that our faith has a legacy to sustain us in this day, in this week, in these times. And it's a legacy that comes to us across centuries. It comes from its roots in Transylvania, where another underdog, David Ferenc, spoke of God as one, to the Goliath of the Catholic Church and was martyred for it. The Reverend Naomi King says, we can be our modern-day David, and we can use those 5 stones to slay the Goliaths of our times, the towering monsters of ignorance, individualism, selfishness, apathy, and cynicism. So today, Jason and I want to offer you, perhaps in a slightly more peaceful spirit, not 5 stones which you can use as weapons, but rather a tour through 5 rooms that you might have journeyed through in a congregation near you. The first room. Our mission is the greatest room. I'm going to invite you to picture with me for just a few minutes this church of both now and later, and I want to invite you to move with me in spirit until you stand before this building for the first time. And if in fact you stood before this building for the first time today, this won't be that hard. But if some of you have been coming into this building for decades, then you might have to exercise your imagination a little bit more. I want you to think about coming in through our fellowship hall as the first room, but also to think about just coming here onto our campus, because this is our great room. It's generous in scope. It stands ready to let you bring to it your own ideas of what is most worth considering. But our mission is so large that while our Borton Hall mirrors it, it uses the actual sky as the ceiling, the earth as its floors, and the timbers of the building are simply the outlines of possibility. The mission is present through everything we do, wherever and however we come together, and it's as solid and real as the ground beneath us. And for a moment, I also invite you to join me imagining that you are the person, that you can use the I of this. I am the person who comes into this space and weeps because I feel truly at home for the first time, welcomed in the fullness of who I am, mind, body, and spirit. Or maybe I am the person who found the courage to do something brave here. Or maybe I'm just glad every week to see the constancy of friends. Within this largest context, I come when my heart is broken and I'm so filled with grief. And I also come at times when I'm so filled with joy I can barely stand still. In the more ordinary days, when life feels mundane and routine and unexciting, we can be reminded here each week that we're part of something much larger than each individual one of us, as precious as we each are, and that we are connected to this great legacy which gives us the lens of love and unity. So here in this hall that we're visiting in our mind, we make music, we gather after mourning, we gather in celebration. And yes, sometimes in that hall, we have an argument or two in the creative tension of becoming, but our mission always brings us back. It's the great heart of this place. And where, I ask each of you, is your life stronger for its beat?
Our foyer invites. To enter this church, I approach the door, the entry just beyond. This experience tells me a lot. Is it easy for me to get through that door in all ways? Is there a ramp that leads right in? Is that door locked? Is there a welcome sign that says, "Come in"? And once inside, what stories do the walls tell? Do I see photos, banners, artwork that represent people like me, that represent people not like me? That state concerns for those who have been marginalized, that recognize the larger world outside? And is someone coming toward me, saying hello? The entry is the place where a stranger like me learns if I will be a stranger much longer. When my husband and I first stepped into the house we now live in, we knew instantly it was ours. The foyer welcomed us. The worn newel post at the bottom of the stairs, evidence of 1,000 hands that had been there before. The battered floor, evidence of 1,000 feet that had been welcomed into that house before. The foyer loved us immediately, and we knew we were home. Foyers don't always welcome. Unitarian Universalists know that. Throughout history, we have witnessed entries that turn people away for their gender, for the color of their skin, for other reasons we have fought against over and over. But it's not enough. It's not enough for us to just try and pry open those other doors. We have to work to make sure our entries, our doors, radiate our commitment to solidarity, accountability with that full spectrum of human identity. The entry is the place where we first show someone we welcome in our multicultural now, whoever, whatever that may be. But that diversity, oh please, it can't stop at the front door. It has to flow through the other rooms. It has to fill the space with the depth and the breadth of what it means to be fully human. And so I ask you, who have you welcomed here you wouldn't have met elsewhere?
Okay, so if you're keeping count, we're up to room 3. And it's the kitchen. And all of us know that connections begin in the kitchen. Because I don't know about you, but that's where sometimes we have our best conversations, where I'm reminded of my stake in your life and you of yours in mine. In my home, when I have guests over, it doesn't matter how much time I've spent cleaning the whole rest of the house, somehow we always end up in the kitchen, where someone is preparing celebratory food or a warm and nourishing meal for guests who need the sustenance and shelter. From the kitchen, the conversations and connections can go everywhere. We leave chatting by different doors and different hallways. Some have walls and some are just mere passages, a point from here to there that really is just a virtual meeting. One might be a formal hall with pictures on it, but another might just be a line between 2 points in open air or a conversation that continues beyond these walls. So what conversations, what connections are you waiting to have and then take out into the rest of your life? Which brings us to our 4th room. It's a meeting room, any number of which we dedicate to our work on justice here. The meeting rooms here, though, always lead to a road. Many of us can picture ourselves in one of those meetings where we're learning about the world, we're learning about injustice. Whatever rooms those explorations begin in, they always require us to take our dreams of a more equal world out onto the street, onto the road, as 50 plus of us did last Monday. If you were there, raise a hand and we'll give you a round of applause. That was great. James Luther Adams said this: "To participate is more than responsibility. It is the way that the tie that binds the bonds of love bring us together in community and send us out seeking and engendering justice and mercy for all." So, today, where do you long to give what we believe legs and wheels and helping hands in the service of those in need?
And in our 5th and final room is the possibility of transformation. And so let us move back into this room, and know that we are here together in this sanctuary now, at this moment in time. And this is the space where we begin to think about the transformation that lives in the possibilities for growth and change held in our hearts and minds. This place is where we affirm what is of greatest worth in our lives, like our connections to one another, connections that allow us to do that work of transforming people's lives and creating those conditions to transform our communities, whether that work happens in small group settings or conversations out there in the courtyard. The rooms that we've already moved through are here, too, held in our minds. But let's face it, as happens in time, some of them need to be redecorated, expanded a little bit, added on to welcome in the new. People like us, decades ago, birthed ideas that paved the way for us being together here this morning. And I can honestly say that finding a Unitarian Universalist community saved my life. At a time when I had begun to retreat from the world, when I had decided that who I was as a gay man and all of the other identities I bring with me, that person would never have a place that he truly felt at home, that the gifts given to me were of no consequence. There was a UU community that welcomed my full self in. And that wouldn't have happened if there hadn't been people long ago and not so long ago envisioning the future and doing what needed to be done to welcome someone like me in. But of course, this isn't about me. It's about so many of us right here who needed all the change that has come before us in order to be here now in this space as who we are. And that's the miracle that comes when we're willing to take that journey into the unknown, like those pioneers like Ida in the Great Migration, willing to go toward a place of hope, knowing that there are going to be obstacles along the way, but certain that it will be worth it. For the stories of where we have come from and what it has taken to get here tell us so. And so we each can ask, what in my life awaits healing and transformation?
And so, some of you have heard me say before that I found Unitarian Universalism as a young adult. I've been thinking recently, though, that I actually visited the first Unitarian Universalist church that I remember as a teenager. I went to this church and they had a man who was considered one of our greatest preachers at that time. And there were so many people who were there to come to hear his words that there wasn't any room to sit down. And so rapt were his congregants that they didn't notice the two mixed-race kids and their single mom who spent the entire service standing in the foyer. We stood there. We heard his very good words, very eloquent words. And then we headed back to our car, and it was almost 10 years later before I ever went to another Unitarian Universalist church. But this time, had just built a sanctuary, one that they would actually outgrow a few years later when they built again to make sure there was room. And there was another great preacher speaking, and the people were rapt, and they were also warm and welcoming and had us all involved in activities by the end of our second visit. The second place is the place that I thought of the first time I ever came onto this campus. You know, we are the people who inherit that optimism and hope, and we know that if there is any promised land, it is only the one that we will help build in this life now. In a world of Goliaths, we cannot afford, I don't believe, to lose a single David, a single person who is ready to stand up with us and hold the mission ground for our world vision of unity and love. In our journey through these rooms together, we can welcome all of those who walk through our doors and find our purpose, solace, and comfort. And the connections we form here can send shoots and roots out into the world to intertwine with other lives and the larger goals of justice in our world. And always we can remember that we are held in this larger frame, our great inheritance of love and unity, which has already proved itself as compass and map in other times of change and migration. We can hold it, that vision, until, in the words of the first hymn in our gray hymnal, every casual corner blooms into a shrine. May we be the ones to make it so.